Hello, wonderful listeners. I'm sure you've noticed that I've been lagging behind a little bit on getting out new episodes for you. So I wanted to take a moment and give you a little update and maybe a little something to tide you over while I get caught up with the next batch of episodes. Tristan and I have been hard at work recording the Aspect series with a fantastic astrologer, Ende Pembroke. And I'm really looking forward to getting the first episode in that series out for all of you. I am expecting to have it out probably next week. I'm going to say May 23rd or 24th. It's just been a little slow going getting that one recorded, in part because coordinating the schedules of 3 busy people is always a challenge. But I've also been busy preparing a talk for symposium called Re-Becoming the One, a free online symposium about the healing of gender and sexuality, which will be starting June 14th of 2022. There will be dozens of great speakers doing talks. I highly recommend you sign up. It's absolutely free, and I'll include a link in the show notes. But my good friend Joji, who, as you may recall, joined us for our series on the planets, will be doing a talk about Mercury as the binary defying planet, and Ende Pembroke, who, if you haven't already been introduced to her work, you will meet very soon during the Aspect series. She will be doing a talk about Venus and Aries, I believe, and there will be many other great speakers and topics as well. But it's just been a busy handful of weeks, and I really missed you guys, and I just want to thank you all for listening. It's been really just an incredible experience getting to connect with listeners from all over the world and really getting to watch a sort of little community around this podcast grow and evolve. Just doing this podcast is really like a dream come true for me. So just thank you all again for sending in your questions and giving us your feedback and just reaching out and just for listening. As a small thank you, I'm offering a 20% discount to listeners to the podcast on birth chart readings. You can just book an appointment through my website, Astrology.com/consultations, and type in the coupon code Astrology Hotline, one word, all caps. And then if you like the show and you want to help support the podcast and help make it possible for me to get more episodes out on a more regular basis, please consider making a donation. Please consider making a donation. Why can't I say that word, donation? I currently have a Ko-Fi page where you can make a contribution of any amount. Really, any contribution, big or small, is incredibly helpful. And then in the coming weeks, I will be launching a Patreon campaign. Subscribing will give you access to things like our cutting room floor audio, which is basically all the stuff that didn't make it into episodes because it was either too off topic or too explicit to allow us to maintain a clean content rating. But you'll also get things like personal shout outs on the show, discounts in my store for t-shirts and posters and all that cool stuff, and eventually access to a members-only Discord server. So I will have that up ASAP. I'm basically waiting for Venus to get into Taurus. We try to make everything as auspicious as possible here at Astrology Hotline. But yeah, anyway, while you're all waiting for part 1 of the Aspect series to come out, figured I'd re-release a rerun of one of my absolute favorite episodes that we ever did, and that is our Halloween special featuring the astrology of Agent Fox Mulder and Jason Voorhees. I know you're probably asking, but Kyle, fictional characters don't have birth charts. Or, maybe they do, but there's no way that they correlate with the story arc of the character or their personality or anything. Well, I'm here to tell you, think again, sucka. It totally can, and it totally did. Check it out. It's pretty mind-blowing. But if you've already seen that one, and you just really need a hot dose of fresh astrology, you can join the 3 of Wands Club on the Clubhouse app, where you can listen to a replay of Tristan and I's last astrology report. But you might also, be able to catch us doing our live weekly tarot discussion or one of the other awesome groups we have from time to time. So check it out. Enjoy the episode, and I can't wait to have some new stuff out for you. Thanks, guys. Hello, you're listening to Astrology Hotline. I'm Kyle, and hosting with me today is Tristan Paler.
Hello, everyone.
We're going to be doing a special episode today in the sort of the spirit of Halloween. How are you feeling with Scorpio season so far, Tristan? Now that it is just entered, I believe, this morning, right?
Yeah.
October 23rd.
For some reason, I had the date mixed up. I thought it was later than this. So, I did my usual thing where, I get up in the morning and I look at the transits for the day and I was like, oh, it snuck up on me.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very characteristic of Scorpio to sneak up on you. Mm-hmm. Very stealthy. Wasn't expecting it.
Totally.
And so far, the sun is one of my time lords this year. And, so far having the sun in the fifth house has been nice. So it's transiting through my fifth house when it's in Scorpio. And I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been enjoying today overall. But I know that this is pretty much my favorite time of the year, like every year. I don't know about you, Tristan, but I absolutely love Halloween. Sort of a protest against the early Christmas decorators who start decorating in November. Sometimes, I don't always do this, try to be a little tasteful, but I mean, I definitely put up my Halloween decorations October 1st, but sometimes I'll do it in September just to rub it in Christmas people's faces.
I think my room is decorated for Halloween 365 days.
Yeah. My life is decorated for Halloween.
Yeah, my life is very much Halloween-y.
Want to interview Cancer risings and see if it's just a universal thing. It's having Scorpio on your fifth house. If Halloween just ends up being the favorite holiday of Cancer risings everywhere.
Is what brings Cancer risings joy, but Scorpio.
Yes.
That's where the house of joy is in our charts. Don't underestimate Cancer risings.
No.
We seem innocent and sweet, but we have Mars ruling our fifth houses.
Actually, huge creeps.
Yeah, our idea of a good time is a little messed up.
Yeah, it's I don't know, but I wouldn't have it any other way. It's a good time. What are you anything in particular you're doing to get in the Halloween spirit?
Not really this year. To be honest, I kind of feel like I feel about Halloween similarly to how I feel about New Year's, where, there are so many years where I get way too hyped up and then end up just like setting myself up for disappointment. But it's also, I mean, we're in sort of a transition right now where we're still settling into this house that needs a lot of renovations. So, putting a lot of energy into decorating right now. Mm-hmm. It just feels like it would be misplaced energy.
Yeah.
We need to get the house in good enough shape to be festive, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's a good excuse to do that stuff. I know that's I tend to keep things a lot cleaner because I enjoy my living space so much more because it's full of Halloween decorations. So I actually care about it enough to do more of the detail cleaning.
I love that. I mean, I'm very excited about this episode. This feels very festive. I feel like this is my big Halloween celebration is doing this episode.
One of the nice things about, speaking of the fifth house, having a kid is that trick or treating gives me an excuse to actually get a Halloween costume and dress up.
Right. What is your Halloween costume this year?
Oh, I think I would like to be, and I think I'm gonna go with Professor Snape this year.
Ooh.
Even though I can't get Declan to get on board with me to dress up as another Harry Potter character.
Oh, that's too bad.
I think I'm just gonna do it anyway. Because
what's he dressing up as?
A werewolf.
Ooh, I like it.
Yes.
That's what I should do.
An adorable pink werewolf. Not even a scary one.
Declan is my hero. I'm playing a werewolf in D&D right now, but my werewolf character is very unconventional and has a lot of still has this is of the same mind when he's shapeshifted. So he doesn't want people to be afraid of him, and he goes around wearing a giant blue bow in wolf form to look less intimidating and blend in a little bit better. So I love the image of the happy, sparkly pink werewolf. I feel like a real sense of solidarity with Declan.
Yeah. I mean, he does have this very sparkly Venus and Pisces in his 5th house. So
that's lovely.
Yeah.
That's so much lovelier than my 5th house.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Different ideas of Halloween costumes, but it's a good influence. Good influence on me. But I don't want to get too off track, but I didn't know that you did D&D.
I do. Well, we started recently. We've wanted to for a really long time. And my partner Keith finally took the plunge and taught himself to DM. So it's just been me and Keith and my best friend for a few weeks.
Holy moly. We do have the same chart, I swear to God, because Megan and I, maybe within a year ago, both got interested in the idea of doing D&D at the same time. And we haven't been able to find a DM to host a game for us, so we haven't actually played yet. We'd really want to. So I don't know. You guys want to do a little DM or D&D party?
Well, we're gonna start a new campaign in December with, we're gonna add another friend to the table. So, maybe this podcast episode, everyone is listening to the beginning of a new D&D team up. You're hearing fate in the making.
You're I don't know, you're being Jupiter in my 11th house right now, because you're making a dream come true. Yes. Anyway,
do you wanna let folks know what our plan is for this episode? Because this was Kyle's brainchild.
Yeah. Though I think technically you were the first one to do this. What we're actually doing. Decided to, in the spirit of Halloween, have a little bit of fun with astrology, and we both chose birth charts of fictional. What would you call them?
Spooky characters, horror characters, or horror adjacent characters.
Yeah. Maybe we're kind of answering our own question to some degree. Is that can fictional characters have birth charts? Do they line up with the lore of that character? The fictional timeline.
I think my character makes a pretty good case.
Yeah, I am excited to hear about yours. You want to jump in?
On a late November night in the small town of Chilmark, Massachusetts, a 12-year-old boy wakes up in the bedroom he shares with his younger sister to hear her desperately calling his name. "Fox," she screams again and again, but as Fox tries to respond, he realizes his body is completely paralyzed. Unable to turn his head, he can't see what is happening to his sister. A bright light fills his vision, and he hears a soothing voice speaking in his head as if by telepathy.
"Do not be afraid. No harm will come to her. One day she will return."
When Fox wakes the next morning, his sister's bed is empty. Now let's fast forward about 20 years to the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Special Agent Dr. Dana Scully is summoned to a meeting with the division chief and a mysterious unnamed government official. She is given a new assignment: to work on an obscure section of the FBI with an agent her colleagues refer to as Spooky Mulder. To reach his office, Scully must descend from the well-lit and well-walked halls of the headquarters to a secluded office deep in the basement. Knocking on the door, she hears the voice inside say, "Nobody down here but the FBI's most unwanted." Scully enters the office. Corkboards filled with pictures of crop circles, UFOs, and records of extraterrestrial sightings line the walls. She approaches the desk and reaches out to shake her new partner's hand. "Hi," he says. I'm Fox Mulder. So we will have Mulder's birth chart up in the show notes. I'm assuming he doesn't need much more of an introduction than that, because I feel like the X-Files has been so influential on pop culture that, he's probably a household name, but he is one of the two main characters from the 90s supernatural sci-fi show, The X-Files, which is I would consider it sci-fi horror.
Oh, yeah.
They spend a lot of time running away from aliens and monsters in the woods at night. It's pretty spooky stuff. It's a scary show. Not overly so, but it is scary.
I think maybe our tolerance has gotten higher for horror or something. I feel like
that's true.
The X-Files was the scary show for a long time, and now it's still a great show. I don't get the chills so much anymore. But anyway, yeah, I'm excited about this. It's one of my favorite shows. I grew up on the X-Files. I think you did as well, right?
Yep. I had Scully and Mulder at the foot of my bed. I had a giant X-Files poster, so I woke up every morning to see their faces smiling down on me.
It was that cool.
Well, not really smiling, I guess, looking serious and vaguely paranoid, but
yeah. Yeah.
And I had
which is it's a lot how I felt around that time. So
yeah, I was
serious and vaguely paranoid.
That's exactly my childhood.
It's like my default state.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I had an action figure of Dana Scully that I kept next to my bed. They raised me as a child. They were my parents.
I wish.
I know, wouldn't that be great? I love creepy, spooky stuff. I watched Unsolved Mysteries and I watched The Outer Limits, but The X-Files was really special because
The Outer Limits.
Yeah, The Outer Limits was...
Love The Outer Limits.
I mean, I haven't rewatched it since becoming an adult, so I don't know if it would still hold up. But I mean, as a kid, I ate it up because just anything that was
good.
Creepy and about aliens and kind of unsettling.
Tales from the Crypt, actually.
Tales from the Crypt, yeah.
So great.
That was good.
It's still great. Actually, really hard to get, though. I think you have to get the DVD box set.
Really?
Yeah, it's you can't get it on Amazon or on anything.
That's rough.
But I feel you just anybody it up for people, anybody who hasn't watched the X-Files. After listening to Tristan, you could jump in. Good. I don't know. It's a good lead off.
Yeah, it's the complete X-Files is available on Disney Plus. So, get on that.
I don't know if it is. I think it's just in Canada.
Is it just in Canada?
I don't know. I couldn't get it. I couldn't find it.
Oh, man.
I had to get Hulu. Just don't get me started on Hulu.
Oh, well.
Unless Hulu wants to sponsor us.
There are ways to watch it. Anyway, I guess I should probably actually get into Mulder's chart. I actually wrote a article recently about his chart where I analyzed it. So as far as I know, he doesn't canonically have a birth time. He does canonically have a birth date and location. So I made an effort to rectify the chart. And, after discussing, a few things that don't require a birth time to be relevant, I'll get into, how I rectified this chart and some of the events from Fox Mulder's timeline that actually line up pretty well with the birth time I chose. So Mulder was born on October 13th, 1961 in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. And he was born with the sun in Libra and the moon in Sagittarius. And probably most notably, if anyone's familiar with both astrology and the X-Files, they will not be able to help noticing the conjunction between Mercury, Mars, and Neptune all in Scorpio in his chart. And Mercury and Mars are both at 7 degrees of Scorpio. So just right on top of each other.
That's so awesome for a paranormal detective.
Oh yeah, it's just perfect.
I was gonna say I kind of was a little raised by David Duchovny. My dad was a huge enthusiast of the X-Files and everything like the X-Files. Did you ever watch Coast to Coast with George Murray?
I didn't.
Or listen to?
Oh, no. I mean, I heard of it, but I don't think it was, I don't know if it was popular on TV in Canada.
It was a radio, actually.
Oh,
I don't know
okay.
why I said watch. But it was a radio show, like a late night radio show that was like all about paranormal stuff. But my dad had Mercury conjunct Neptune in Scorpio.
And he loved all the paranormal
Nuts.
stuff too. Your dad is kind of Fox Mulder. That's hilarious. So, I mean, it's probably pretty obvious, even if you haven't watched The X-Files, is that Scully and Mulder are both FBI agents, and they work on a weird section of paranormal cases called The X-Files. Aliens are big, extraterrestrial beings are a major theme of the show. And the major theme of the show is sort of overarching mythology. But most of the show is sort of like Monster of the Week. And, they deal with the Jersey Devil, and they deal with the ghosts and psychics and like anything sort of out there
The
and
Loch
weird.
Ness Monster.
They deal with the Loch Ness Monster. So Mulder's sort of driving obsession in life is investigating these paranormal cases, and he is extremely passionate, extremely obsessed, and extremely paranoid. But I think so. When I started looking at his chart, the first thing that I noticed about it is that he has 3 planets in the signs of their fall. He has Venus in Virgo, he has the Sun in Libra, and he has Jupiter in Capricorn. And fallen planets, we've talked about them a lot on this show, and how, they can kind of be misfits where, they're in the opposite of the place that the planet would be when it is exalted, where it has an easy time being seen and respected. In Mulder's case, he's got a bunch of planets in his chart that don't necessarily have an easy time being seen and respected. So Mulder's like extremely competent, and he developed a reputation for being extremely good at behavioral profiling early in his FBI career. But of course, he's also completely obsessed with paranormal fringe theories, which sets him up to be like a little bit of an outcast figure at the FBI. His nickname, as I mentioned, is Spooky Mulder, and people kind of don't take him seriously. And in a way, it's like Dana Scully is a really promising young FBI agent. She's a medical doctor. She's, extremely successful and extremely competent. So like it could be seen as a little bit of a slight towards her in a way that she gets assigned to basically, run around with this guy as he chases after, aliens and ghosts and stuff. And her job is kind of to come up with rational explanations for the phenomena he encounters. And like in the first episode, she literally, she starts on like a main floor of the bureau or of the headquarters, and has to like descend into this dark, creepy, cramped sort of basement setting. So it's like she literally has to fall, just like the planets in Fall and Mulder's chart. Like you have to fall in order to get to this man.
Yeah.
And then he says his very first line in the show is, "No one down here but the FBI's most unwanted." So it really fits with that, having multiple planets in Fall in a chart, and being like a little bit of an outsider.
Yeah, there's a ton in his chart actually that fits in so many ways. So it makes me wonder if like they were, I don't know, somebody who's into astrology picked this birth date or something.
That's what I kept saying to myself. I was like, and it would make sense. So the showrunner, Chris Carter, he's into all this weird stuff. And like
you have to be into astrology a little bit.
Yeah, like he's got, episodes of the X-Files that are about psychic powers and predicting the future and whatever. So it makes sense to me that he'd know something about astrology. And interestingly, Chris Carter also has the Sun in Libra and Venus in Virgo, just like Mulder. So I don't know. There's part of me. Yeah, when I look at Mulder's
When was
chart,
Chris Carter born?
Chris Carter was born in 1956 on October 13th. So he literally shares Mulder's birthday.
Yeah.
Not the same year, but the same day of the month.
Yeah. I mean, there's a flavor to that time of year.
Mm-hmm.
Sun in Libra is it's a bit more of a critical sun sometimes, you know.
Well, and it's
like all the fallen planets are skeptical in a sense.
Yeah. It's like things don't just come handed easily to fallen planets. So they don't have that sort of innate sense that like, I can trust people and everything's going to be okay. And everything is, in its right place in the world. It's like fallen planets have that awareness that things are not all right in the world.
Yeah.
And that people who, kind of have rose-colored glasses on about it are like, planets in fall look at that and they're like, do you live in the real world?
Yeah.
Do you see how broken things are?
Yeah, they're not under the illusion that, the sort of cream-filled center of life is where life actually is. They kind of live on the fringe, and that's where, in my opinion, like all the interesting stuff is.
And I think that's why, when you look at popular culture, so many of our main characters are like they're outsiders or they're orphans or they're misfits or they're anti-heroes. Like those are the characters that we find compelling. Like our main characters are never just like, here's somebody who just had everything nice handed to them from birth and has never had to face any adversity and, just fits in nicely with everyone and is super popular. Like it's not interesting to follow those character arcs because there's not really much of an arc to be had.
I feel like if anything, they're the character that sometimes, which actually I don't know. Do you know a bit about? Because Mulder's like in one sense, like I think he's considered to be like a good detective.
He's very good. He's an excellent investigator.
Yeah, he's just into some weird stuff that like the FBI can't really take too seriously, at least officially. So they kind of hand him all that sort of backdoor secret stuff. Or he's getting handed it by Mr. X, right?
He's handing it to himself. And he has like,
Mr. X is like giving him the reign to do that. Yeah,
he's getting the reign to do it because of his connections, which is something that I'm going to get into because there are a lot of mitigating factors in this chart as well. It's not all just paranoia and spookiness and being a misfit. He's got a lot of privilege too when you think about it, and that comes up in his chart too. But
Mercury is being sorry.
No, go ahead. What were you going to say about Mercury?
Which is like Mercury is ruling the first house, and it's in Scorpio, and it's how is that exact? I guess it's just it's within a degree of a conjunction with Mars in Scorpio in a night chart. So it's basically it kind of has like the dignity of Mars in Scorpio in a sense.
Yeah, as Mercury absorbs, it's such an impressionable planet. It takes on the character of whatever has the most influence on it, and it's also in terms of sect, Mercury is of the sect in favor. It's an evening star in this chart. So, when Mercury is an evening star in a night chart, then it is in sect. So this is, a nighttime Mercury in a nighttime chart. So it feels at ease in this chart. I don't know if at ease is really the best way to describe Mulder, but hopefully you understand what I mean. Yeah. It's like, it's where it's supposed to be in a sense. It's not at ease, but it's not supposed to be. It's where it's in a place where it can function and do its job well.
Yeah. It's compatible with its environment. It's a little easier.
Yeah.
Things translate easier, smoother. And it's also, looks like it's outside of the beams of the sun, which is always nice for Mercury.
Yeah, it's a rare situation when that happens.
Yeah, it's usually, which in Mulder's case, it is retrograde, which is appropriate.
Yes.
Mercury spends so much time not visible.
But yeah, it really does spend so much time not visible. And the retrograde is also interesting because, the X-Files are, a lot of the cases in the X-Files are sort of forgotten or, they're like unsolved and they stretch far into the past. And there is that sort of like orientation towards the past with retrograde planets. So I feel like that's kind of appropriate for Mercury retrograde in Scorpio to be spending all of its time kind of digging through these dusty old forgotten files.
Yeah. Just like taking a second look too, like, like, wait a second, the stuff that like everybody else kind of glossed over. Wants to dig a little deeper into it.
Yeah, Mercury retrograde is good at catching stuff that you missed the first time around.
Oh yeah.
One of the other fallen planets I think is very interesting in Mulder's chart is Jupiter in Capricorn, which is separating from a conjunction with Saturn in Capricorn. And Saturn would be the most challenging planet in Mulder's chart because he was born at night. And Saturn is the daytime malefic. So, Saturn being kind of cold and restricting is like extra cold and restricting at night and just a little bit more extreme and harder to handle. So I find it really interesting that Jupiter represents the law. It represents authority. It represents, elected officials. And, if you think about like I guess, well-functioning Jupiter, you might picture a government that is functioning well and that, serves its people. Jupiter is a very social planet on a large scale. It's not so much about, one-to-one socializing as it is about like groups and organizations and society at large. And, those kinds of social dynamics kind of going smoothly. And, people in authority, behaving in a way that is just and of service to, the people that they're supposed to be working for the benefit of. But then, Jupiter in fall is kind of an appropriate symbol for the government as it exists in the X-Files universe, which is extremely corrupt and extremely conspiratorial. Yeah. This is not a just government that Mulder is dealing with. And the FBI is, in the X-Files universe full of secrets that would absolutely shock you.
And that might be to some degree in the real universe too.
Yeah, which, I think is...
I think like fallen planets can also have that tendency of like reading more into that too than there actually is, but in the X-Files universe, he tends to be right a lot.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about the X-Files universe is that, aliens are real in the X-Files universe and paranormal stuff does happen. And there actually are these, massive conspiracies that Mulder does have clues about, although getting hard evidence is often a challenge.
Yeah. There's so much to say about that. It's I don't know. I do always I really when I think about like government and law and stuff, I think of Saturn and Jupiter as being kind of a pair in creating that, where Jupiter's kind of like your carrot, when it comes to managing the peoples, the benefits that you offer them, or the stabilization, the positive benefits of living in a society, living under law, the reason why we all benefit from that and don't resist it too much in general. But Saturn's more of like the stick end of it, defining the limits of what you are and are not allowed to do. And the FBI, it's a little more on that Saturn side, I would think in general.
Yeah, where it's not, you don't want the FBI at your door.
Yeah.
It's not an enjoyable, it's not a Jupiterian situation. You know, it's like Jupiter at your door is, more like, I don't know, the representative from the political party you vote for, bringing a sign to your door that you can put on your lawn or whatever. Whereas, Saturn's a little bit more like law enforcement is here because you are in big trouble.
Yeah. Even like Jupiter separating a little bit from Saturn, like as Jupiter's being received by Saturn, which in some sense helps the dignity of Jupiter in a sense, but it's like separating and it's kind of like, Mulder's in the FBI, but he's kind of like, what is this organization that I'm in?
Yeah, it's not, the X-Files is not a very pro-government or pro-law enforcement show by any means.
Yeah, no.
It's very much, law enforcement is corrupt and Mulder and Scully are kind of like actually decent human beings who are, trying to do something good with their lives. But they're sort of caught up in the midst of it. And, there's sort of these moral dilemmas where, they kind of have to work against the Bureau in
Yeah.
order to do the right thing a lot of the time, which I think also fits with the fallen Jupiter,
Against
where
it and
it's
within it. Yeah.
yeah, you're working against the status quo in order to, like, Jupiter represents justice and truth and all those great values, but
Mhm.
Mulder is living in a world of secrets and lies, and so he has to kind of resist that world and butt his head up against it, often at great risk to himself,
Yeah.
in order to reveal the truth and see justice done.
I feel like I want to believe is such a Jupiter and Capricorn statement too. It's
It
like
really
it
is.
wants to be Jupiter so bad. And it is Jupiter. It's just like but it needs proof, it needs cold hard facts to like back it up. It's ridiculously on point.
Yeah, it's so on point.
And even in like the fifth house too. I remember Scully at one point, like it was like a theme in an episode where I think she asked Mulder if he had any hobbies. And while, Scully is kind of like the main character, things settle, focus on her, and you get a sense that she has some sort of personal life. I don't think you ever get the sense that Mulder has a personal life.
No, his whole life is pursuing this single-minded obsession. There is no personal life for Mulder.
Yeah, and Jupiter's ruling the seventh. It's like never in any relationships that I'm aware of.
And it's funny, you never see him sleeping in a bed. He's always when you see him at home, he's sleeping on the couch.
Yeah.
Like,
oh wow.
Which I feel is really kind of fitting for Saturn in the fifth house, ruling the fifth house. We're like, the fifth house is how you relax and get comfortable and feel pleasure and enjoy yourself. And, bed is a very fifth house location.
Yeah.
And he doesn't sleep in one. He's just like, he's at work even when he's sleeping. He just crashes on the couch, in his dress shirt or whatever. Like, comfort is not a motivation for him.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a signification of Saturn that comes from my favorite 2nd century Hellenistic astrologer, Vedius Valens. In his significations of Saturn, he writes that it indicates deceit, secrets, and the concealment of treachery, which is just such a delicious sentence for
my favorite Saturn significations.
Oh, yeah, it's the best. And it's like... I think that really fits for having a very Saturnian Jupiter, where, Jupiter in its sort of ideal state represents, authority that acts fairly and truthfully. And in Mulder's case, authority is concealing treachery, secrets, and deceit that he's trying to get to the bottom of.
Also, I mean, Mulder has Venus in Virgo on the ascendant. It's also like overcoming Saturn and Jupiter by a trine pretty tightly.
Yep.
And I don't know, it like adds to like the sort of justice seeking element. I know that's not a specifically Venus signification, but like it's a bit of a greater good sort of vibe, having like both benefics there. Actually, no, they're not quite enclosing Saturn. They want to. I think they want to bonify Saturn, and succeeding a little bit.
Yeah, if he was born just a few days earlier.
Yeah.
He would have a benefic enclosure around Saturn, but he wasn't, so he just gets to be super paranoid all the time instead, I guess.
Yeah. Venus is also like ruling the ninth too, which I feel like just adds to like maybe Jupiter and Capricorn on its own, maybe depending on situations, might give up seeking out the truth and might just like submit to Saturn and be like, all right, I'll play by the government agenda, whatever. But the fact that he's like still like seeking the truth, the truth is out there. I feel like it's like Venus is like, hey, Jupiter, remember the ninth house? You do that pretty well.
Yeah, like trying to help out. Well, it's almost a religious conviction. And in episode 4 of season 1, that is the first episode where you hear the line, I want to believe. And it's in a specific context. It's not that the line isn't stated in the context of Mulder wanting to believe in aliens. It's actually a lot more specific than that. And the first time we hear the line, Mulder's actually sitting in a church. So, as people probably gathered from my little story time, what kind of drives Mulder to this sort of extreme obsession with these weird cases is that he believes his own sister was abducted by aliens when they were children. And, it tore his family apart. And he forgot the event, but he went to like a hypnotist who does, like regression hypnosis therapy or whatever the technical term for it is. And so at the end of episode 4, Scully actually dredges up the tape that records his session with the hypnotherapist, where they go into his repressed memories. And he's talking about as if he's 12 years old again on that night when his sister disappeared. And, he talks about hearing this voice in his head that's saying, she's going to be okay. She's going to return. Don't be afraid. And the hypnotherapist asks Mulder, do you believe the voice? And he says, I want to believe. Mm-hmm. And that's where that whole line comes from. It's not like I want to believe in the paranormal. It's that I want to believe that my sister's okay. I want to believe that the beings who abducted her are actually like telling the truth, and she's going to come okay. She's going to be okay, and she's going to come back to me. And that whole scene, it sort of goes back and forth between Scully listening to the tape and Mulder sitting in a church looking at a photo of his sister and crying. It's like a really moving scene in the show. I feel like that, Venus in fall ruling the 9th house, and this sort of like, it is almost a religious conviction that he has. And, it's often faith rather than reason that drives him, even though he's a very good investigator. He's very good at using reason. That's not really the thing that's driving him forward.
It's love.
It's love. It's Venus that's driving him forward.
Yeah. But it's like it's Venus is challenged in Virgo, similarly to Jupiter in the sense that it's a little too practical, a little too critical. It's a little too, it needs constant reassurance.
Yeah, it's not like Venus in Pisces, in its opposite sign, in its exaltation. Venus in Pisces is very good
at the beauty of everything.
Yeah, and very good at, Venus in Pisces would probably hear that voice and go, okay, everything's going to be fine, and feel very certain of it. But Venus in Virgo has a very unsettled energy. It's not at ease. It's a little anxious. It's a little preoccupied. It's a little high strung. And it needs concrete. Virgo needs concrete proof or concrete evidence. Venus in Pisces is more idealistic about love. Venus in Virgo is like, I need you to show me that you love me and that this love is real in a very tangible way.
Mm-hmm. God, you did I'm really impressed. You did a brilliant job rectifying this. Because having the ruler, Mercury, is in the 3rd house of siblings.
That was
that had to be, yeah. And then like Mars is it's ruling the 8th, right? You can get like abduction in the 8th, things disappearing, things going missing. I have Mars in the 8th and I'm losing stuff all the time. But also conjunct Neptune, like something from out of this world literally made the sister, disappear. Where is the sister? She's still there.
Is she even on this planet? Yeah, like with Neptune, with the outer planets, I think it's important to, remember that we didn't know that Neptune existed for thousands of years. It wasn't until very, very recently in human history that we were able to see Neptune. Only after the scientific revolution were we able to actually look at these outer planets. And so symbolically, they represent things that are far outside our everyday understanding. And, Neptune in particular is sort of like this realm of unreality where the rules don't make sense, and up is down and down is up. Things are truly alien. So, for Mulder to have this really significant conjunction of 2 personal planets with Neptune makes a lot of sense. And, the way I rectified his chart, I got lucky in a way. Mulder, because he's a fictional character, his motivations are like a little easier to figure out, like real live people. It's really tough to figure out like, what is the main driving force in my life? I don't know. That changes every
Most people don't have
years.
one.
We don't have one. Like we might not even have one at all. And if we do, it's subject to change all the time. You know, we have more than one at a time sometimes, and they conflict with each other. And, you know, when you're just trying to tell a story, your character often has clearer motivations than a real person does.
Yeah.
So, you know, the idea of the planet that rules the first house is that it is sort of like the captain of the chart. It's the captain of the ship. It's the one who's giving the entire chart direction and steering it in a particular direction. Mm-hmm. So where I didn't use any sort of traditional methods to rectify this chart. I just started from, okay, what is the overarching motivating force in Mulder's life? And that is solving the mystery of his sister's disappearance. That drives him more than anything else. And so I thought, well, the ruler of his first house needs to be in the third house then, because the third house represents siblings. So I played around with it for a while, and there were a couple of options, like Leo rising would also put the sun in the third house. But when I was playing around with it, when I landed on Virgo rising, I was like, this one makes the most sense. It puts the ruler in the third, which is Mercury, and it puts that Mercury, Saturn, Neptune conjunction.
Yeah.
As like that whole like three-headed monster is
like that's Mulder.
Is Mulder. Yeah.
Mulder. Yeah. That's his personality.
That's his whole personality.
Yeah.
And then sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm like excited. I don't know. I'm like too excited. It's like, oh yeah, it's nuts. This is the truth. The truth is it's right here. I found it.
It's Mulder's birth chart.
Mulder's real.
Mulder is real, everyone. The other thing, of course, is that having Virgo rising puts Venus in Virgo in his first house. And there's sort of like an ongoing joke through the series that like Mulder's got like a little bit of a thing for sexy magazines and, you know, not safe for work materials.
That I believe that.
Yeah. And he doesn't really make any effort to hide it. You know, like Scully will walk into the office and he's just like reading dirty magazines and stuff. So I thought that's so funny. Like that. Venus is in fall, but it's like in the first house. So he's got this like, there's a way in which he's very Venusian. Like to the audience, he's certainly a weird Venusian where like he is charming and lovable to the audience. To the characters in the show, they're all like, he's a weirdo. We don't take him seriously. But to the audience, like he's always making like really inappropriate jokes. Or like he's just, you know, him and Scully will be like investigating a case and someone will have like died a tragic death and like, you know, left behind a bunch of grieving family members. And Mulder will make like some really off-colored joke about how that person died to Scully. Yeah. I'm just like, Mulder, why? But
yeah, it's very Venus and like that cynical sort of off-color, or even be like gallows humor sometimes.
Gallows humor, yeah. He's like sarcastic and like, you know, it's literally the first line is, nobody down here but the FBI's most unwanted, like just that kind of like self-deprecating humor even. Which, you know, Venus represents humor, and in Virgo it's a little bit more of a like edgy, cutting, unusual, sometimes not at the right time or place kind of humor. Yeah.
Well, there's like a vague like kind of flirtatiousness sometimes to the way he can turn it on, you know, when he needs to.
Yeah.
And quirky sex appeal that I mean, Mulder obviously has.
Oh yeah, like he's hot. Yeah. He's hot. He's like he's charismatic, but just in such a weird way. He's not at all traditionally charismatic, and so I just feel like that Venus in the first is just it's fitting.
There's like a Moon and Sag vibe too. There's like a I always think of Top Gun when I think of Sagittarius, which is not what Mulder is, but like there's that sort of like cockiness. Of Sagittarius.
Yeah, planets, he's got that confidence.
Yeah, there's like a subtle like. I always think of a dude. Call that not a finger bang, but like you know, like a hey, you know, doing one of those and like
finger
shooting.
Guns.
Yeah, doing a little finger gun.
Yeah.
Hey there, kitten. I don't know, being a creep, I guess. But no,
See, Mulder's not a creep. That's the thing.
no,
It's
he's
like,
not.
He can. That's part of why.
He's
like,
spooky.
Yeah, he's creepy in the sense that he, likes ghosts and aliens and zombies and whatever. But like,
Yeah.
he's not a creep in like a romantic or sexual sense. And so
Yeah.
that's why, like, in a way, when you see him, when you see his like, porn collection or whatever,
Something
on the show,
innocuous
it's
about
just, yeah, it's like kind of innocent. Like he's not actually like harassing.
The fact that he's not
anybody.
hiding it makes it
Yeah.
like just more like, oh yeah, I mean, single dude appreciates naked women's.
And Scully just makes jokes about it all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's.
I mean, like kind of that, like, I don't know. Just watch the show, which I haven't watched it since I was like a teenager, really, and I've been in the process of rewatching it. It's a show. A freaking great show, dude. That like weird sexual tension with Scully. It's always kind of like under the surface. It's like tasteful, Even when it seems like he might be like maybe flirting a little bit, it's like he's not really overstepping any lines,
It almost, I mean, it's interesting, and I don't know. I grew up watching the show, but I've only started rewatching it recently. So, maybe some of the things I'm saying, in later seasons are not quite as true. I'm just like starting the second season. So I apologize if I've at all mischaracterized him, if in later seasons he does something like genuinely creepy. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. He might.
But I know that there was like,
I think we got to hold him to the 90s standards too.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was also the 90s. Which, I don't think is an excuse, but
yeah, no, I know.
There's that sort of like time period awareness. I don't think like it was Chris Carter's intention for them to be romantically linked. And that, I think for the first, when it was still a new show for the first while, there was that, like, that was a big discussion among fans, like, will they or won't they, are they into each other or not? Because they have such great chemistry with each other and they so clearly care about each other. But it's like, it's really hard to pin it down because there are also just a lot of moments where it really feels like a sibling relationship. Yeah. Which would also fit with Mulder's chart with, this, 3 planets in Scorpio, ruling his ascendant in the 3rd house. And he's got this like when he puts his hand on Scully's shoulder, or like there are moments where like, they've just been through something really tense and he kind of like pulls her in close and they kind of like walk away from something together. It feels more like he's being sort of like a protective sibling than someone who has a romantic
surrogate
interest.
sister.
Yeah, it's just like he's probably, projecting a little bit of his little sister onto Scully. And, doesn't want anything to happen to her because he'd have to relive that pain of not being able to protect his sister.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think, I really can't remember what does happen with them romantically, if anything, but,
well, I'm not
going to actually really wanted them to get together. I don't know. But that's also sort of really part of like a good long-term relationship, is that there is like, you can kind of play multiple roles, with each other.
That is true. Yeah, and they're friends, they're coworkers, they're work partners, they're a lot of things to each other.
Yeah.
And in an increasingly corrupt and untrustworthy universe, that's the only person they can trust, which I think is probably why I love the show so much, was that like there's something comforting about Scully and Mulder because they can always rely on each other.
Yeah.
And even though they live like in like their fictional universe is messed up and you can't trust most people in it, but it's like no matter how messed up the world around them is, their relationship is like an anchor.
Yeah.
That was very comforting to me as a child, I think, was this idea that like there are people in the world who can be sort of like your port in the storm, that no matter how crazy things get, that person can be relied on.
Yeah. Yeah, they're very like safe for each other.
Yeah. One last thing I want to mention about Mulder's chart before I'll just briefly talk about some of his life events and how those connect to his chart. But the last thing I want to mention is, as much of an outcast and sort of a fringe person as he does have like some, conditions of bonification, to use the, astro jargon, going on in his chart, which, represent like luck and opportunities and privilege. In particular, he's got Venus bonifying the moon and Saturn and Jupiter. So Venus is in Virgo. It's making it overcoming. Yeah, it's a night chart, and Venus is the night benefic. So the nicest planet in a nice chart, generally speaking, will be Venus, and Venus is squaring the moon in Sagittarius, so bonifying the moon, and Venus is trine Saturn and Jupiter in Capricorn, so bonifying those planets as well. And I find that really interesting because like Mulder gets a lot of leeway to do stuff that most people would not be able to get away with doing.
Oh yeah.
In the first episode, he reveals to Scully that like, the only reason he's allowed to keep, having an office at the FBI and pursuing the X-Files is, that he's made connections in Congress. So like he's got friends in high places, and the benefics, Venus and Jupiter in a chart, can definitely represent friends in high places who benefit the owner of the chart in some way. So, he's got like authority figures in his life who are kind of like looking out for him and giving him opportunities. And like he gets into trouble and he just gets bailed out all the time. Like he flagrantly breaks the law and gets bailed out again and again,
Yeah, and you never know who his kind of secret allies are,
Yeah.
And the ruler of the 11th is the moon in Sagittarius in the 4th.
There you go.
It's like he knows who they are, but you don't,
Well, he doesn't even always know, but
yeah, that's fair.
That's a really good catch. So Mulder's 11th house is Cancer, which means it's ruled by the moon. And the moon is being bonified, and the 11th house represents, allies and mentors and people in positions of power who benefit you in some way. And in a way, he is very privileged. Like he's an FBI agent. He's making lots of money. He gets like free reign to basically run around the country, just doing whatever he wants, like following his passion projects. So, as much as, his life is challenging and, he's kind of an outsider within the FBI, when you think about him relative to, maybe the average American, he does enjoy quite a bit of privilege.
Yeah, no, for sure. Most Mulders out there are living, way more on the fringe. He's on the fringe of the FBI, but he's in the FBI.
Exactly, he's still there.
Powerful agencies in the world, really.
Yeah, he's still got a ton of power.
Yeah,
and you see that contrast a little bit in the show, where you see him interact with, some of the quote unquote little guys, the people who are like, believers in UFOs and, have like photos of their UFO sightings and whatever. And he interacts with these characters in like small towns who, they're like, they don't have nice clothes. There's one character who shows up a few times in the show who has actually been, abducted by aliens, and he's involved in all these organizations, setting out to prove that aliens really exist. But he's just like, he's living in a trailer, and like, he's like he's like a genuine social outcast in that universe. He doesn't have powerful connections. He doesn't have the kinds of benefits and status that Mulder has.
Oh, yeah.
And so you see that when they interact, you start to see that contrast a little bit. Like, oh, yeah, he's not just like an average dude who believes these things. An average dude who believes these things is going to have a very different experience than he does.
Yeah. I have one more quick one. That's a fun one.
Go for it.
Mercury, is conjunct the ruler of the 8th house. It's like retrograding away, and he's constantly just narrowly escaping death.
Yeah.
It's like happening all the time. He's always getting into dangerous situations, drawing his gun and stuff, but like just narrowly escapes.
That's a really good catch. Yeah, the eighth house, represents death. And
Which in like real life, like not like a little sometimes. I don't know, but sometimes it really shows up like that. It's
yeah.
funny.
Yeah, and the ruler of his ascendant, the first house is the life and the body, and your survival basically. And the ruler of the eighth house is conjunct the ruler of the first, which, in this genre, like in an average person's life, that's probably nothing to be afraid of. But, if you're genre aware, if you're like, I'm an FBI agent in the X-Files universe, and you see that in your chart, you might be like, that's a little worrying.
Yeah.
Because I'm literally running into death constantly. Like my whole
Yeah.
job is chasing, situations that could get me killed.
Yeah,
which,
if you're in a lot of
also
situations
fits
where,
that.
I would definitely be interested if the aspect is applying or separating in that specific situation.
Yeah, I should check. Hang on one second. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's separating because Mercury is retrograde there, but I will check for sure.
Yeah, it's 7 degrees, 54 minutes, and Mercury
human
is
error.
7 degrees, 29
Yeah, it's
minutes.
It's
retrograde.
separating.
Mhm.
They're 12 minutes apart, and Mercury is separating from the conjunction. Yeah, that's very interesting. He's just like constantly like Mercury retrograde, and Mercury is such a slippery planet too, just like slipping through the hands of death.
Oh, and then, maybe you have to watch the show to find this one out because Mars also rules the third. Does he ever find his sister?
Dun dun dun.
Dun, dun,
Is she
dun.
still alive? So events in his life, when I started looking at his life events, I got really excited because they fit his chart super well. And it made me feel like I'd done a good job with my very just like bare bones rectification.
No, this is
It's
brilliant.
not this easy with real people. It's a lot easier with fictional characters.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They're a little less three-dimensional and self-contradictory.
Real people are more complicated.
Yeah.
I think, but...
All right. So there are dates for a number of significant events in Mulder's life. The first one I'm going to talk about is the night of Samantha Mulder's abduction. And using annual perfections, age 12 is a first house year. So the first house and its ruler will be emphasized in a first house year. And of course, the first house ruler, according to my rectification, is in the third house of siblings. So you might predict that a first house year would be a really significant year, not only for Mulder's sense of identity and purpose, but also for his relationships with siblings. And that was exactly the year that Samantha was abducted. And the night of the abduction, Mercury, which rules Mulder's first house, was transiting through his third house. So he was having a Mercury return when Samantha was abducted. He was about halfway through his Mercury return. So the night that it happened, Mercury was in Scorpio and just, past the conjunction with that Mercury-Mars-Neptune combination in Mulder's chart.
That's nuts.
Right?
It's like it really happened. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like it was planned.
It's making me like really question the nature of reality right now.
I know, right?
In some ways, I want like it's because I did a lot of acid at one point, but I wonder sometimes if like things like this are more real than a lot of people's lives in some sense, in that they exist in so many people's imagination that they're kind of the equivalent of real because they're so relevant to people's lives, these fictional characters and the events of their lives.
Yeah.
And somehow astrology reflects that.
Well, and I guess, I kind of think of astrology as being sort of like it's, a way of talking to higher powers, as it were, I guess. And, if higher powers want to talk to you, if, there's some sort of spiritual consciousness out there that wants to talk to you, it can do so through whatever it wants, whether that be fictional characters or, anything else. So, maybe it's a way of saying like, hey, this is really significant. This is a story that resonates with people. It strikes a chord with people.
Oh yeah. I mean, it is, I think, I mean, it's such a culturally relevant show. I know, like, it's funny because with my son, there's like a lot of stuff that I know you wouldn't necessarily be particularly interested in, but I just sort of see as kind of culturally mandatory stuff that you just need to read or see to just be fluent in the culture in some respect. And I think the X-Files is one of those things where, having a basic awareness of what the X-Files is, I mean, it's kind of unavoidable just from hearing about people talk about it. It's such a cultural reference. But yeah, I don't know, that makes sense. And I mean, astrology can often point to when a person, a native or whatever, is going to be important to the culture in some sense. And kind of imperfectly. It's not always like super consistent, but you can sometimes see that. And so, I mean, it sort of makes sense that a fictional character, if they're important enough, will have a very resonant birth chart.
Yeah, and he is an important one. Next event that I have a chart for is the chart for when Mulder actually joined the FBI as a young man. And that one's pretty fun. Because using annual perfections, he was in a 12th house year. And the 12th house in Mulder's chart is in Leo. So it is ruled by the sun, which makes the sun a particularly important planet to pay attention to during a 12th house year for him. And the sun was part of a stellium in Scorpio, because of course it was in Scorpio, going through his third house when he joined the FBI. All five planets plus the South Node were all sitting in his third house, right on top of the Mercury-Mars Neptune conjunction in Scorpio. And here's this, gifted paranormal investigator.
Sun, Pluto, Moon, Mercury, Saturn, and the South Node.
They're all packed in there. So I enjoyed that. And then using...
and Southland's in his 10th too.
Yeah, that's right. And then, using a more advanced technique of perfections, I noticed that his second house was also highlighted that year. And it highlights Venus in the first house, which is the ruler of Mulder's second house. So again, kind of pulling in those themes of identity and purpose into that year. This is like a major shift for his identity. And but also the second house is a house that I think we shouldn't sleep on when it comes to career. I'm noticing more and more that I notice the second house being relevant to what somebody does, more so than the 10th or the midheaven. Like over and over again, I see the second house says a lot about what somebody does as a job. And, a year where the second house is highlighted, because the second house represents what supports our lives, our livelihood, our money, our resources, our assets, and how we get those things and how we maintain those things. So a year where that house is highlighted, it's kind of unsurprising to see like, hey, that's a major promotion. He's officially an FBI agent in this year. And that will be, for the foreseeable future, how he pays his bills.
Yeah. I think a lot of what people use the sixth house for nowadays, not that I don't think that the sixth house has anything to do with work. It does. I just think that a lot of those significations I would look to the second house for is kind of like, just how you make your money, which may or may not be, connected to your reputation.
Yeah.
Which is more 10th house.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Or, what you're called to do, you're sort of calling in the world.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And the last event from Mulder's life that I have a chart for is when Agent Scully walks into his office. And this one is probably my favorite. So Mulder...
Ooh, there's a clock in the background of that episode too.
Oh, you know what? I should look.
I remember. I don't know why I remember that.
I'm pretty sure there is a clock.
I mean, if you want to go.
Of course I do.
That's I don't know. If for some reason it's occurring to me and that's making me like, I don't know.
All right. Well, I'm not going to do that right this second because that will take a lot of time. But yeah, I'm definitely going to see if I can find an exact time for when Scully shows up in his office and they become partners. So that event happened.
What to do a bonus episode or something? Bonus episode for the bonus episode.
Or we have the
where we do Scully's chart.
Fun.
Makes me wish I had done Scully.
Well, that'd be cool. But we got to have some like. I feel like the X-Files is horror, but your character's a little more like traditional horror. So I think that's, Yeah,
it's not nearly as interesting.
I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, sorry, what was I saying? Mulder was 30 years old when Scully was assigned to be his new partner. And that was, drum roll please, a 7th house year.
Saturn.
The 7th house represents partnerships. And if my rectification is correct and Mulder has Virgo rising, that makes Pisces his 7th house. And not only does Dr. Dana Scully have the sun in Pisces, but on the day that she became his partner, the sun and Venus were both in Pisces, transiting through Mulder's 7th house. Isn't that sweet?
Oh. Yeah. Well, would that have been a Saturn return as well?
He wasn't having a Saturn return. His Saturn return had ended already because Saturn was in Aquarius when he met Scully.
Varies a bit there.
And his Saturn's in Capricorn. So yeah, it was just after his Saturn return that Scully turned up, which is kind of funny because I do sometimes find that like, the Saturn return happens and then, there are sort of consequences of the Saturn return that occur later. And I feel like Scully is definitely a grounding influence on Mulder. So, maybe through his Saturn return, he'd sort of matured enough that, the powers that be in the universe were like, okay, you can have Scully now. You're emotionally ready to have, a professional partnership. And, in a way, a more than professional partnership, because however you define their relationship, they grow extremely close and become...
It's very 7th house.
Yeah, it's like they are each other's confidant. There's no one else they can really trust and no one else... Like Scully does have personal relationships with family members that you see quite a bit. Even in the first season of the show, you meet her parents and, she's close with her family, but like you can't go home, at Christmas and tell your family details of the top secret cases you're working on. Like there's a level of intimacy that you just can't have with most people in your life when you work the kind of job that Scully does that requires a high degree of confidentiality, but Mulder's the one person who knows everything, Yeah.
Kind of night chart or day chart, it's like that after the Saturn return, it's like, you graduate a little bit. So Saturn opens up like some of its restriction a little bit. It's like, okay, you get to this next layer. It's like releasing its grip a little bit on Jupiter. Yeah. The ruler of the 7th.
Yeah, that's right, because Jupiter does rule his 7th house.
Yeah, that's nice.
It is nice.
That makes me happy.
Yeah, well, and there on a happy note, because Mulder's story is full of dark twists and turns, but
now I feel like I'm going to be watching the show now with this chart.
Oh yeah,
I'm going to keep it saved because that's good. That's wild. It's a little mind-blowing, actually.
I have made a case for astrology.
I know. You made a better case with a fictional character than most people have with real people's charts. So.
Well, I guess, I've also made a case for the importance and maybe to some extent the reality of fictional characters. They live in our culture. They are real and alive to us, and, they grow and change through the years with us.
I'm going to do this with so many characters now. Because, mine was like, oh yeah. But unfortunately with my character, there's some controversy about the birth date. So just kind of had to pick the most common one.
Yeah, you always find the charts that have like controversial birth times and
Eighth house for you.
Yeah, and you've got to like try to solve the mystery of, when were they actually born and what is the real chart?
Nothing is easy to nail down. But I mean, I don't know, somehow there's a difference, and maybe we'll get into it. I think there's a difference between these two characters and maybe what they mean in the popular imagination.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, with that, let's introduce my subject. On the night of June 13th, 1946, 16-year-old Pamela Voorhees gave birth to her first and only son. Baby Jason was the apple of his young mother's eye from the moment he took his first breath. But his father, Elias Voorhees, a taciturn and often violent alcoholic, struggling to scratch out a meager living as a coal miner, reacted to his son's birth with disgust. Jason had been born premature, his face hideously deformed, and hydrocephalus caused his skull to be abnormally large and misshapen. To protect Jason from discrimination and ridicule, Pamela raised Jason in isolation on the outskirts of the small town of Crystal Lake, New Jersey. But even in isolation, Jason was never safe from his father's increasingly naked hatred and aggression. Eventually, Pamela began hearing strange voices which only grew louder the more abusive Elias became. One evening, guided by the voices, Pamela dragged an axe in from the shed and into the bedroom in which her husband slept. Raising the axe with one hand, Pamela shook her husband awake with the other, so she could savor the look in his eyes before she sunk the rusted axe blade into his skull. For years, Jason lived with his mother, safely cloistered away from the hostile world which lay beyond the tree line marking the limits of the Voorhees property. She was his entire world, and he was hers. Until the day came, in the summer of 1957, when necessity forced Pamela to take a job as a cook at the local summer camp. Since Pamela had no alternatives for childcare, she enrolled Jason as a camper at Camp Crystal Lake, and tasked the camp counselors with protecting Jason from persecution by the other campers. But on the afternoon of September 13th, 1957, two lusty counselors snuck off for a bit of afternoon delight, leaving 11-year-old Jason alone with the other campers. The campers began viciously taunting Jason, calling him a freak show and attempting to cover his head in a cloth sack. Desperate to escape, Jason ran off of a dock and into Crystal Lake. Pamela, hearing her son's cries for help, came rushing from across the camp. But when she arrived, it was too late. Jason, unable to swim, had already disappeared under the waters of Crystal Lake. But his body was never found. Camp reopened the next summer, despite the controversy that followed the drowning death of one of its campers. But when the butchered bodies of two counselors whose negligence had led to the young boy's death were discovered one morning, the camp was abandoned. For decades, stories circulated around town, with many locals believing that the grounds were cursed. It wasn't until 1979 that an attempt was made to reopen the camp. It was not long, however, before the counselors taking part in the refurbishment of the grounds found themselves being picked off, one by an unknown assailant. But Alice Hardy, the last of 7 campground employees alive, managed to get the upper hand and decapitated the murderer. The killer turned out to be Pamela Voorhees, bent on getting revenge on all counselors of Camp Crystal Lake for the death of her one and only son. Alice fled the camp in horror, leaving the machete and Pamela's lifeless head behind. Shortly after, a figure emerged from the forest. Jason Voorhees, having witnessed the death of his mother, had come to collect her head. His last link to humanity irrevocably severed, he silently swore that not even death would stop him from slaking his unquenchable thirst for revenge on the blood of anyone who crossed his path. Yeah, so obviously I did Jason Voorhees of the Friday the 13th series, which is how many movies in that franchise? Like 10, 11? There's a ton.
Oh, I don't even know.
And one in which Jason goes into space. And I think it's maybe for that reason. I think that Jason Voorhees is a different kind of character in the popular imagination. It's a much more fantasy sort of character. I don't think we project Jason Voorhees into the real world the way that we might with Agent Mulder.
Yeah, we might see a bit of ourselves in Mulder and Scully. We probably don't really see ourselves in Jason Voorhees as much. That's, what makes horror characters interesting is sometimes they're so extreme and so outside of, what we're used to.
Yeah, but nonetheless, I mean, the chart, at least going by what seems to be the most popularly accepted one, I think it fits pretty well. So I'll just go over it a bit. So I also did a little bit of rectification. I chose a Capricorn rising for Jason's chart because that would put the out of sect malefic, ruling the first in its detriment in Cancer in the 7th house. Saturn is at about 23 degrees of Cancer. Venus is just kind of separating from a conjunction with Saturn. Mercury is also with Venus and Saturn in Cancer. The Sun in Gemini conjunct the North Node, and the Moon in Sagittarius in the 12th house, applying to a conjunction with the South Node. Now, this indicates that Jason Voorhees was born very close to a solar eclipse because the sun would be, or the moon would basically be, in the shadow of the Earth because the sun would be on the opposite side. Now, visually in the sky, this is what we call a blood moon. It's a rather ominous looking moon when the moon turns red. Freaked people out. It's been freaking humans out for thousands of years. So it's pretty choice for a horrible serial killer. But like the moon being eclipsed, particularly on the South Node, you do get a sense of like physical or even emotional diminishment, loss. Sometimes it can show up in the charts of like real psychopaths, and that's like it's like the emotions like aren't there, like they're hidden, they're obfuscated by the sun. There's actually a prominent figure born on the following day, which I won't get into because I want to stay out of the politics. But if you do your research, you'll know who I'm talking about. It might be a good example of that. But anyway, we also get Mars in the 8th house, the evil 8th house. Jupiter in Libra, hanging out with Neptune in the 10th. So, anywho, this is a night chart, obviously.
So we've got someone born at night, very close to a lunar eclipse, under a full blood moon.
It actually wouldn't have been a blood moon until the next day, like in the afternoon, and it would have been visible on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
But for astrological purposes,
it's still fitting.
If you see like the luminaries with a node or with both nodes, you're looking at the significations of an eclipse in a chart, which aren't always, horribly negative. But
if you're in a horror movie, this is another I think genre awareness is very important when you're analyzing your own birth chart. Like if you sort of live in a nice, if you live in a nice neighborhood and like nothing much exciting goes on, and you were born during an eclipse, it probably means something, perhaps a little bit less extreme. But if you are like in a horror movie and you are a horror movie character and you were born with the luminaries near the eclipse points, then you should be worried.
Yeah.
Because that
people should be worried about you.
That scriptwriter has plans for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, I guess that's part of the reason that I chose Capricorn rising. It's putting Saturn in its detriment in a complicated sign for Saturn in Cancer in the 7th house. And really, the kind of main theme around Jason Voorhees' life is revenge for his mother, which may not be super obvious with the 7th house, but the 7th house is the house of open enemies.
That's right.
And there's a good argument to be made for Aquarius rising too, because the 6th or the 12th, there's actually a lot of debate about it. 6th can be like hidden enemies, the enemies that you can't see, but so can the 12th. Sort of overlap.
I feel like in his case, the enemies were pretty obvious.
Yeah. Well, but they're also, even after he killed them, I think that the second movie begins with the sole surviving character, the one that killed his mom, being killed. And I'm actually not a big Friday the 13th fan. I found the backstory interesting, and I like the idea of these movies, or like the idea of the characters, but slasher movies were never quite my thing. But they are a very Venus-Saturn thing. Like there's something about that particular kind of genre of slasher movies, which was very wrapped up in sex. There's a kind of weird sexualization of the violence that's going on, and it happens with all serial killers, really. I mean, usually real serial killers do so because they achieve sexual satisfaction from doing so. So the Venus-Saturn conjunction is pretty relevant there. But, there's kind of a mixed bag with that, too, because Saturn is being enclosed by benefics. Venus is just separating by a couple degrees from Saturn. And Jupiter is actually stationed in the 10th house, sort of hurling a ray back at Saturn. It's at 17 degrees. So Saturn has aspects from benefics on either side of it without any other planets throwing an intervening ray. And traditionally, it's kind of associated with things sort of going your way and stuff like that. And I find in practice is that what happens is that you still get you'll still get like malefic stuff, potentially. You still kind of get the problems. It's just that they don't end up affecting you. Maybe they affect other people. It's sort of like you get sort of protection from it, but sometimes at the expense of other people. But it really kind of makes sense in Jason Voorhees' case, where the dude doesn't die. Like even when he gets killed, he is resurrected in some way. I think in one of the movies, he ends up possessing the bodies of some other people after he's killed. But he, kind of miraculously escapes death in some way. Like everybody thinks he's dead for 20 some years, and he's actually just living in the forest. It sort of ties in with the dispositor of the ruler of the first being in the 12th house, being the moon, eclipsed by the south node. It's multiple significations of being hidden.
I think that was the piece that sold me on your rectification of this chart is, the ascendant represents your life force, basically. And its ruler, is kind of anything that's happening to the ruler of the ascendant in a chart is sort of like, happening to that person's life, to their body and physical vitality. So for the ruler of his ascendant to be, Saturn in detriment, says a lot about how challenging his life is. But, the fact that it is being enclosed by Jupiter and Jupiter and Venus, so that it's being sort of protected by Jupiter and Venus, and he literally does not die. He just keeps coming back, is hilarious and perfectly fitting. I feel like maybe, we should translate a little bit of this astrological jargon we've been using so that, people are
You're much more considerate about that than I am.
Well,
they'll figure it out.
They'll figure it out. They'll Google it. Well, I feel like, Hellenistic astrology is also one of those things that has a lot of jargon that people are still, Hellenistic astrology is still sort of making its comeback after 2,000 years or whatever. So,
I don't want to assume that everybody knows what we're talking about.
There's some jargon that is not popularly known. So, this is a pretty complicated concept to explain, but I'll do my best. If you're following along, if you're looking in the show notes at Jason Voorhees' chart, and you look at Saturn in Cancer, it's at 23 degrees of Cancer. So, you think about every planet in this chart that could make an aspect to 23 degrees of Cancer and how close they could get to an exact aspect. And the planets that make the closest aspect by degree on either side of 23 degrees of Cancer are Jupiter and Venus. Venus is at 25 degrees of Cancer, so only 2 degrees away on one side of Saturn, and then on the other side of Saturn, Jupiter is in Libra, and Libra and Saturn, or Libra and Cancer, square each other. They make a square aspect. So, just a few degrees away on the other side, Jupiter is throwing a square aspect to Saturn. And so Saturn is just nicely cushioned, between an aspect from Jupiter on one side and a conjunction with Venus on the other, and no other planet makes a closer aspect. Mm-hmm. So, it's not a super intuitive thing to spot in a chart, but, if you're following along at home and you're looking at your own chart or whatever, get in the habit of looking to see like what are the closest aspects on either side of a planet. And if they're both benefics, that planet's got like, it's kind of in the lap of luxury. So it's a funny, it's sort of contradictory where you have this very extreme like night chart, Saturn and detriment, but getting this nice little cushion from, the soft, fluffy planets, Venus and Jupiter.
Yeah.
Which are very conducive to life. Venus and Jupiter are life affirming and life supporting. They're about all the things that you need for life. Jupiter brings the rain that makes food grow and all that kind of stuff. And
yeah, I think in practice it plays out differently in lots of different ways. But
yeah, in his chart, it plays out as, he's got kind of a messed up life, but he doesn't die. So
yeah, the malefic is still there. And, the malefic is it's being able to dish out lots of punishment, but it's not really, has resilience. It's really hard to kill because it's protected.
Yep. Yeah, it's like it's not a nice planet necessarily, but good luck getting rid of it.
Yeah. But I mean, in practice, that can be more favorable for actual people. But
yes,
I think that it really depends on the context. Yeah, it depends on the context of your life, and what you do with all that.
Yeah. Who's writing the script of your life? If it's a horror writer, you're in trouble.
Oh yeah. But it's also just fitting for Jason is masked. He always has that hockey mask on. Or the second movie, he had a cloth bag over his head or whatever. But his face is always covered to conceal a birth defect, a physical deformity. You get like Saturn, feigning appearances, disguising oneself. And then, Cancer it very much deals with kind of the physical body a lot. And also his life is very much wrapped up with his mother, which the moon gets a lot of significations of the mother. And, you see some difficult planets in Cancer, just some Cancer stuff going on. You might see some stuff tied in with not just mothers, but like nurturing parenting. That's Cancer, is things going on with the feelings and topics and subjects of caring, of giving shits about people and people giving shits about you. And that was a pretty complicated topic for Jason Voorhees. But so, you also get like Venus is the ruler of the IC, which carries some of the significations of the fourth house, sort of a floating mini fourth house a little bit. I don't know if you do the exact same thing, but like if you have like the IC in another house than the fourth, when it comes to topics of like home and family and stuff, I'm going to look at both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do that too.
Even if it's not like super closely configured or whatever.
Just, in case anyone's unfamiliar with the term IC, it's the opposite of the midheaven.
Yes.
It's not always labeled. When you cast a birth chart online, they don't always label the IC. And it's the inner heaven. There's the midheaven, and then there's the lower heaven, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of charts don't cast the south node either. For some reason, we just don't want to pay attention to the bottoms of things.
No, it's
all about the top.
The ascendant and the descendant too. You don't always see the descendant labeled. Mm-hmm. You'll see the ascendant labeled. If you're using whole sign houses, you'll see the ascendant labeled, but not always the descendant.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. It's sort of like, we want to...
It's all about me and my social media presence.
It's exactly it. Yeah. Like not what goes on at home, not
what
like,
I want.
Yeah, not my relationships with other people. It's just,
Yeah.
what I look like to the world is what's important, apparently. It tells you a lot about our culture, I think.
Western pathology.
Anyway.
Yeah. Not that I'm immune or, not guilty of it to some degree too, of course. But yeah. And then Venus also rules, the 10th house. And so, Saturn is like maltreating Venus and Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn is overcoming Jupiter by a square. Venus is kind of escaping from Saturn a little bit, and I imagine, I don't know, he seems to get everybody in the end. But
it's so funny how that whole relationship between Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter in his chart is really complex.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a sense, it's like he's hurting Venus and Jupiter, but Jupiter and Venus are sort of protecting him. But
yeah,
in practice, it's like he's killing everybody, and nobody can really quite kill him. They can kill him for a little bit, but
they can delay him or briefly contain him.
Yeah, he just keeps coming back, and it's like tied into his 10th house. What's visible. What the movie that we watch, where he's doing all that nasty stuff. And Jupiter, in a sense, if you were like a real person, he's Jupiter's delivering some fame to Jason Voorhees.
This is true. He is famous. He is a cultural icon.
Yeah.
And Jupiter gives fame and status and authority up in the 10th house as your public image. So there you go. It may not be he may not be well known for good things, but he certainly has cultural influence.
Yeah. It's been a bit since I've done an episode of Killer Cosmos, but I think in looking at so many serial killer charts and even the ones that I've done episodes on so far, it's like, benefics, a lot of times they stabilize and affirm nasty stuff. They'll let you keep getting away with stuff for a long time, if that's your prerogative to do not nice things. So, yeah, they're not always making things nice. Maybe making him nicer and easier for you.
The birth time you've given him and his birthday, he would be born during both the day and hour of Jupiter.
No. Yeah. Yeah, and that's really all of him. That's what his whole life is all about, entertaining folks.
He is an entertainer.
He is an entertainer.
Well, and I think of when I see Venus conjunct Saturn, I think about unconventional pleasures, and the sort of worst case scenario is getting enjoyment or entertainment, Venus significations, from really dark and scary stuff, Saturn. Which in maybe a less sinister way, his chart maybe represents what horror movies do for us, where we play scary video games or watch scary movies for pleasure. We go to a haunted house for pleasure. Venus is pleasure. Venus conjunct Saturn is like, well, I'm going to take pleasure in going to a haunted house and, getting the shit scared out of me and seeing all kinds of dark, spooky stuff.
Fear or pain.
Yeah, fear, getting enjoyment from fear or pain. There's a sort of catharsis that comes from that. And there's a sense of being able to sort of confront the darker side of life in a safe, contained space. It's the movie isn't real. You can turn it off at any time. You have complete control over the experience. So yeah, I do think a little bit of that. Watching horror movies as recreation seems like a very Venus Saturn signification.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely not going to always show up as something like sadism, but like Marquis de Sade, we were talking about earlier. Sometimes you'll see Venus Saturn in charts of people like that. But there's lots of healthy, natural ways that plays out. We all got to make peace with the fact that pain is a part of life and reality. Venus can be very helpful in making that more digestible. Yeah, that Saturn stuff.
Yeah, there are ways that all the restriction and pain can play out in a nice, healthy way between consenting adults. And that's kind of the nice side of Venus Saturn is helping you, you said. find a more pleasant way of dealing with those realities of life.
Yeah. Actually, I feel like this chart, it really does a good job of describing, Jason Voorhees and his life and stuff, but like what the character is doing for us,
Mm-hmm.
It's very much otherizing the pain and like giving us pleasure. It's in the seventh house, Saturn,
Right.
and Venus, and there's actually like a mutual reception, like a mixed mutual reception with Jupiter is in the exaltation in Libra of Saturn, and Saturn is in the exaltation of
Right.
Jupiter in Cancer.
Right.
So they're kind of like exalting each other, sort of, to some degree.
Yeah, that might soften that relationship between them a little bit.
Yeah, like in practice. But yeah, it's like I don't know, it's like if you're like sitting in the first house watching, you're kind of like looking across in the theater. I'm almost like imagining like a movie theater, being the first house being like the seats to the movie theater, the seventh house being like the screen, 10th being kind of like the overarching purpose, what it's all about. It's about it's an out of sect benefic. It's like maybe not the most tasteful form of entertainment in the world, but it is nonetheless doing something for people, scratching some required itch, something that needs to be processed in some way. I think horror movies, I know that like when I'm feeling like particularly stressed out or having like lots of negative emotions, I like horror movies a lot, but there's something like cathartic about it. It's like I don't know, something to like purge or process heavy emotions, or even like project them out into something else has nothing to do with me.
Mm-hmm.
And even maybe give perspective to the horror movie of your life is nothing compared to the one you're seeing on the screen.
I love the metaphor of the first house being the audience and the seventh house being what's on the screen, because the seventh house is the other. And it really is like, it fits Jason's chart really well that his identity represented by the ruler of the first house is wrapped up in the seventh house and the other, where he sort of doesn't have an identity of his own. Like his identity is like what he is to
Tell
us.
me who to be.
Yeah. He's what we need him to be. We need a slasher for some horror films.
Yeah.
And I like the metaphor where your first house is sort of like you sitting in the audience, and the seventh house is what's going on the screen. And then I think of the 10th house as being kind of like what happens when you get outside the theater and you interact with the public, when that movie becomes a very like large scale cultural phenomenon, and like everyone's talking about the latest Halloween movie and everyone's talking about it on social media. And so you go out and interact with the world. That's the 10th house part.
When I see the rule of the first and the seventh, that often plays out as somebody sort of watching. It's like they're kind of experiencing their own life, as like watching themselves through other people's eyes. There's kind of like a sort of projection equality. It's like it's like you're watching yourself on a screen. And actually a lot of actors have the ruler of the first and the seventh. It's like playing the parts of other people,
They are whoever you need them to be.
Yeah. And their identity is very much wrapped up in who you think that they are. And to the degree that sometimes it's hard for them to tell the difference, which we all struggle with to some degree. Yeah, you also get like Mars in the 8th house, ruling the 4th house. And the mother was not only a serial killer herself in the house of death, but is also dead from decapitation.
His story is so wrapped up in his parents.
Yeah.
Which you kind of see all over his chart. And, with like, especially if this is a night chart and you've got the moon as the sect light, it's sort of like the source of light in the chart. And the moon often represents parents, but it's like in the 12th house and conjunct the south node, where it's kind of in this like dark place. And, the ruler of his 4th house is Mars in the 8th. And like, the traditional, in traditional astrology, the 4th house would be the father and the 10th house would be the mother. And I mean, as we've discussed or I guess we haven't published that episode yet. Sorry, never mind.
Yes. You'll You'll find out.
You'll
all the more
find
reason
out.
to listen to every episode we make.
Yeah.
Always. Forever.
Yes. Traditionally the 4th is the father and the 10th is the mother. And, I don't stick to that strictly because, I'm not crazy about the whole gender binary and everything, but I'd keep it in the back of my head. I tend to use...
It doesn't end up working very well.
Yeah. I usually just sort of stick to the 4th house for both parents. But I mean, even if you were to use the traditional 4th is one parent and the 10th is the other parent,
Mm-hmm.
The 4th house ruler being in the 8th, representing, the parenthood being wrapped up in death. And then the 10th house ruler is Venus, which is, stuck in that conjunction with Saturn, that's ruling the chart.
Yeah.
So it's just like either way, whether you use the 4th or the 10th to represent one or the other parent, both parents are kind of represented by planets in some sticky situations. And, his mother murders his father. So,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Again, if you have things like this in your chart, please do not. It does not mean these things for you. Your life is hopefully not being written by a horror writer, but his was. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the main juice that I had. There's probably some other things that'll occur to me later, but I do have
his. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, please.
Oh, just that his midheaven is being ruled by Mars in the 8th house.
Yeah.
So another, indication of his public image, his, larger purpose in the world is, the death planet in the death house.
Yes. Yep. I guess I missed my true calling. Having the ruler of the 10th and the 8th. Maybe I should have been a serial killer,
It's never too late.
It's never too late to start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe you should just, write horror movies.
Yeah. Well, that's part of why I'm not a great writer. It's part of why I started the Killer Cosmos, though. It's remediation for my chart.
Yeah, that fits really well. If the ruler of your 10th house is Mars in the 8th, make a podcast about serial killers.
Yeah. It's funny, though, like, just on the subject of the 8th house. This is Halloween after all, because I would call that, like, if you were to give a genre to each house, which I sometimes like to conceptualize the houses as, like, oh, what genre movie is this house?
Mm-hmm.
The 8th house is horror. You make it suspense thrillers as well. Like, but there's so much in the 8th that has nothing to do with death. It's like almost like there's a vibe. And kind of like distill all the houses down to like a vibe.
Yeah.
7th is also associated with death.
Yep.
The 4th as well. Even the 12th.
Yep. Yeah, you
Death
find life and death are everywhere in the chart. That's really what everything boils down to at the end of the day. The two inevitabilities.
Yeah.
Birth and death. Yeah, I think the 4th and the 7th are sort of underrepresented in the discussion of symbols of death in astrology.
Yeah.
The 7th house is where the sun sets. It's literally where the sun dies, and then it reaches the turning point at the 4th house.
Mm-hmm.
If you're tracking diurnal motion, the 7th house is the
midnight.
horizon, and then the 4th house is solar midnight, where it's the darkest point of the day, and that's sort of like the turning point where once the sun has crossed that point, then resurrection begins, and then you're headed towards sunrise, and the whole cycle of birth and death begins again.
Yeah.
But the 4th is sort of like the deepest part of the underworld, like right between that turning point.
Yeah. Also, getting off into the weeds a little, but death. Death is like the one thing that you do like alone, you don't get company necessarily, at least not with other tangible human beings. And the 4th house is very much the known secrets, the things that you know that maybe other people don't.
Yeah.
Experiences that you are very conscious of, experience vividly, but it's not part of everybody else, not something that everybody else can see.
Mm-hmm.
And what's more, what is death more than that?
Well, this got deep.
I think the 8th house is, I think, more like after death, which is why you get ghosts and ghouls and,
Yeah, mediumship and also inheritance and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How does death affect the living? I think is a big part of the 8th house. If people die, how does that change your practical life, because it's the opposite of the second house, which is a very concrete, tangible house about resources, right? Like, we share resources and we leave resources to each other when we pass away. And the 8th house has a lot to do with that sort of concrete side of death.
Yeah. Really, this, and actually take a quick opportunity to, because next Halloween, because I really wanted this for this Halloween, my original idea, but, didn't really have enough time to send the message out in advance. So I'm going to do it now. If anybody listening has an interesting 8th house placement, planet in the 8th house, or the ruler in an interesting place, or if you just have like an awesome ghost story that you want to share your chart, and Tristan and I can do the job of we can figure out where that might be showing up. Please share that, because I would absolutely love to do that episode next Halloween.
Yeah, that would be super fun. Just like spooky 8th house stories.
Yes,
because I see it show up a lot with people. I have someone significant in my life who has Venus ruling the first house from the 8th, and has a very profound spiritual connection with the deceased.
Yeah.
And, believes in ghosts and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love that stuff. I love hearing those stories. I'm very glad that I don't get that version of the 8th house where I have to live it. I just, to hear the stories. I want to hear the stories.
Yeah, my lot of fortune is in the 8th house, and I'm still hoping that a ghost will show up and be like, "Hey, I know where there's some buried treasure for you." Maybe it's like move into a haunted house, and the ghost is like, "I know where the location of like some 100-year-old riches are on this property. Let me show you." That'd be pretty sweet.
Yeah. Well, you have
because if I was a fictional character in a fantasy universe with a lot of fortune in the 8th house, that would probably happen to me. But I live in the real world, so it's not as likely.
I think there's some with the 4th house, like buried treasure too. But
yeah, death and buried treasure being kind of symbolically connected.
But I mean, we both have the ruler of the 8th and the 7th, and I don't get this, but you have like more relationships with like spirits and that sort of thing in a sense. Right?
Not with necessarily like 8th housey type spirits. Because I think of the 8th house, I tend to think of like, spirits of the dead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that things would fall. Well, so I think the 8th house don't necessarily have to be formally living things. It just be part of like, what's on the other side of the veil.
Right. Yeah. Like what is, that's where the sun is beginning to set and sort of going to the other side, to the world where things are that we don't see. It doesn't necessarily just have to be death. It could just be, all of those kind of mysterious things that we can't fully understand.
Can't quite see, make out.
Yeah.
Properly. I think Mars in my 8th house just says, "Fuck off, ghosts."
Yes. Mars is scaring the ghosts out
Thanks,
of your
Mars.
8th house.
Appreciate that. Do you have anything like that? Because I did one little transit for Jason Voorhees.
Oh, go for it. Sorry, we got way off track.
No, it was an interesting conversation. Yeah.
It's Halloweeny. We're talking about, the 4th and 8th houses and spooky astrology.
Spooky, yeah. I want to talk about spooky stuff. That's like going to be like all year probably with us to some degree.
I only want to talk about spooky stuff.
I know. Okay, where do I have that here? So I did look at the date for Jason's death, or initial alleged drowning. It's September 13th, 1957.
All right, I got it.
Got it? All right. And really, I'm just going to read this off the cuff because I just pulled it up. So see what we see. So, I mean, do you see that there is, the moon is on the south node in the 5th, but, there's kind of a repeat of the aspect in the sky, which is actually something. When you see configurations, transiting configurations, when something is activated in your chart, even if it's not like in the sign or making an aspect to the planet in your chart, I do find that like often shows up in your life in some way. So like in this case, this would have been a 12th house year for Jason because he was 11 years old. And in this rectified chart here, I have the moon applying to the south node in the 12th house.
Oh, wow. Saturn is right there.
Yep, Saturn, which, the moon rules in his chart, Saturn is transiting the 12th house. And you also, the house placement of this configuration makes a little bit of sense where, the moon was in Taurus, applying to the south node, similar to in his chart, which is going to happen multiple times throughout that year. But, it does involve children. It's children who are attacking him and causing him to run into the water, causing him to kind of undo himself to some degree, 12th house. And if we take my time literally, the south node is on the IC.
Right.
Which really, if we're looking at, the fourth house is having some death indications, it's really the IC, which is like the bottom of the chart. And in Jason's case, he became not visible to other people, and people thought he was dead, but he really just disappeared under the surface of the water and lived in the woods for the next 25 years.
Well, and there's the 12th house traditionally represents what happens prior to birth. And I find, when you're looking at perfection years, there's a sort of cycle where, the 12th house, as we've discussed the 12th house a lot on this show already, it represents endings, it's closure. The first house is birth, it's new beginnings. So in a 12th house year, it's kind of like tying up all the loose ends. And then a first house year is getting a fresh start, or a bit of a rebirth, which, for most of us is symbolic. For Jason Voorhees, it's quite literal, where during his 12th house year, he quite literally dies, or at least seems to die, comes very close to death. And a stage of his life dramatically ends, and he ends up, coming out of that and having a new life in a sense.
Yeah.
And Saturn naturally rejoices in the 12th house. The 12th house and Saturn have very similar symbolism. And it was Saturn transiting through his 12th house during the 12th house year when he drowned, sort of like, here's the end of this part of your life, and soon you will begin a new phase of your life.
Yeah.
In a really dark and creepy way, because it's a slasher flick.
Well, yeah, and there's even like a signification for like you could pull drowning out of Saturn and Cancer. It's very heavy and water.
Yeah, a lot of the really old school significations for Saturn have to do with the sea and with sailing.
Oh yeah,
fishermen. It's interesting. It makes sense because it's not something
it's the limit of the
about.
land.
Yeah, and it's like traveling by sea is nerve-wracking because it's just you're surrounded on all sides by death and the unknown.
Yeah. You're doing Saturn when you're on a boat. You construct this sort of little island to protect you from what's otherwise an extremely hostile environment for humans. But yeah, in this case, Saturn is coming to the planet that rules it, kind of wanting to. It's like Saturn's coming for the rest of the story. And with the South Node, not always like so extremely awful and tragic, but some sort of loss or diminishment, or especially when it's being eclipsed, the moon being eclipsed, something's going to disappear. Something's going away.
The light is disappearing.
Yeah.
Jupiter transiting the 10th, literally having a Jupiter return is interesting too, because you were just starting to comment on Jupiter rules Jason's 12th house, so it would have been one of the primary time lords, one of the most important planets to look at by transit during a 12th house year. And the 10th house is your public image, so there you go. It's like he's having a Jupiter return in the 10th house when Jupiter is the time lord, and this was sort of the moment that brought him fame.
Yeah, it's like at least from what I've seen in the first movie. I think the first one's the only one I've really watched. And it's really the beginning of the story, in a sense. You get some maybe jibs and drabs, but you actually get like clips from, him drowning. So it's like the beginning of the visible story. The part that you see.
Yeah, that is when he becomes seen by the world and acknowledged by us, the public.
I don't know about the Uranus transiting Pluto in his 8th house. That's It's going to be such a, I mean, yeah, you can pull meaning out of it, but I won't go there. It's too broad of a transit.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's
long period of time.
Yeah, but it is like, it sort of adds a little bit of additional, background flavor. Sort of like, this is the time, if this is going to happen in the world, it's going to happen at this time to somebody.
Yeah.
With these two, with Uranus sort of meeting this generation's Pluto sign, somebody in this generation is going to experience something wacky.
I mean, it was pretty
transit's going on.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty, actually, I mean, the movie itself was pretty, I think Uranus Pluto. It was shocking.
Yeah.
It still is. It's like an unsettling movie to watch. I mean, now it's like we have seen worse at this point with special effects, but the shock value it had was definitely part of the gimmick, if you will, part of the appeal. I don't know. That's more or less all I got. It's probably good for Jason Voorhees. So you got anything you want to add?
No, I think I'm good. I think we've been going for.
This is a fun one though. I'm like,
this is fun.
Probably one of the more fun. Like I always have fun recording these, but this is more relaxing. I don't know. It's like these are fictional characters, and we can just play with them a little bit.
Yeah, it's like there aren't any sort of, Jason Voorhees and Fox Mulder are not going to lose any sleep at night over what we've said about their birth charts.
Yeah, but it's also like kind of new too. I don't know. It's like I'm learning something new about astrology doing this. Is that this actually kind of shows up for these fictional characters.
Yep. Yeah, the planets are always talking to us. It's like they want to talk to us. Yeah.
Yeah. What are you guys doing? Kooky.
Just telling us stuff.
Kooky guys.
Making snide remarks about our lives.
I guess Mars in the 9th. I don't know. It's like it just actually, yeah, Mars is about to go through a death and rebirth because it's the sun is applying to Mars.
Oh yeah, it's part of the synodic cycle of Mars.
Yeah.
There's going to be a shift in the Mars cycle.
Yes, a new Mars will be born. But first one must die.
Yep, it's got to plunge into the heart of the sun. That's another thing for people who who aren't familiar with the synodic cycles of planets. That's another fun thing to follow as an aside. Synod is a word meaning assembly. So a synodic cycle is any cycle of sort of meetings between two or more planets. And usually when we say it, we're referring to a planet cycle with the sun. Because when you're actually stargazing, it's very obvious, you'll sort of watch this star, it comes up like with, Mercury recently was an evening star, and then you see it, start to disappear into the sun, and then it emerges at a different time of day. So it's almost like, the star falls into the heart of the sun and it burns up in this fiery furnace, and then it's reborn and it appears at a different time of day.
Yeah.
Which is very, very cool and beautifully symbolic. You can draw a lot of meaning out of those events.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. We could totally go into a discussion about that, which, yeah, we should probably not because
it's too much for.
We end up talking about like everything in every episode.
I know we're everywhere.
Yeah, it's chaos.
It is chaos.
Mars rule the people.
It's
Mars moon.
No, chaotic. That's it. It's the moon is just like all over the place. Like it moves so quickly. It just jumps from place to place to place to place. Like we got to cover all the ground.
Yeah, but Mars is like more directed chaos. I'm going to point the chaos at something, at a target, and make it blow up. But the moon is more like, well, it's over here, It's just blasting that chaos everywhere.
Oh yeah,
and bringing you into it for hugs.
For hugs. Thank you to our listeners for sticking through our chaos.
Yeah.
You got two Cancer rising hosts, two moon ruled hosts. We're never just going to totally stay on topic.
I do want to hear from the Cancer risings. If you are a Halloween fan, or just not of the series, but like of Halloween, do you love Halloween? Do you love Scorpio season? Is this a fun time for you, Cancer Risings?
Yeah.
Or is it not? I would like to know that too. Actually,
Yes.
more so, because I have, now I'm just assuming that all Cancer Risings love Halloween. That may not be true.
Yeah, I want to know
Yeah.
if our fellow moon-ruled people take joy in the Scorpio-y time of year.
My secret projects are always in the works, and one day they will see light.
When the time is right.
And that's when you'll know about them. Yeah. So,
Nothing. I was just gonna ramble. I was just gonna say, when those secret projects emerge from the 12th house into the light of the first house.
Mm-hmm. Or the Scorpio 5th house.
Yeah.
You'll see it when it's ready, when I decide you can see it. When I let you.
When you've earned it. Yeah.
When I deem you worthy. Yeah. Well, thank you, Agent Mulder, and to a lesser degree, Jason Voorhees, for sharing your charts with us and your kooky, awesome lives. Yeah. Thank you all for listening.
Happy Halloween. Happy Scorpio season.
Have a happy Halloween.
If you have a question about astrology, or about your birth chart in particular, that you would like to hear answered on Astrology Hotline, please email us at astrologyhotlinepod@gmail.com.